You muted, Don.
Of the natural resources. I'd like to introduce you to the conferences. This conference mini-series is a variation of our annual spring Woodland Conferences. We're pleased to be able to continue to offer interesting and educational presentations this year in a new online format. Hopefully it will be safe to meet again in person for next year's conferences. In the meantime, we hope you are staying safe and healthy during these challenging COVID times. This mini-series has been developed by the Woodland Conference Series Provincial Committee, consisting of personnel from the Department of Lands and Forestry, individual woodland owners from across the province, Nova Scotia Woodland Owners and Operators Association, the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodland Owners, and the Association for Sustainable Forestry, the Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute, and finally, the Western Woodlot Co-op. Now, the technology that we're working with this evening, known as WebEx, the attendees, yourselves, are automatically muted and your video is turned off for the benefit of the presentations. All attendees' names are invisible to each other, but visible to our event host. There will be opportunity for you to ask questions. In fact, there's a Q&A panel on the upper right side of your screen where you can post your questions. Just click on the little arrow beside the Q&A. You'll be able to forward questions for one presenter or both, whatever you choose. I will then read the questions out to the speakers so that they can answer them verbally. And of course, we may not get to all the questions during the time allotted, but our goal is to send out answers after the session today to any questions that are not answered tonight. There also will be some polling questions that will appear on the right of the screen below the Q&A section. These sessions are being recorded and will be posted for future viewing. The link for these recorded sessions will be available at the nswoods website. That's NSWOODS website. We will send out an email letting you know where and when they are available. Now, chainsaw draws. At the end of the conference mini-series, we will have 2 lucky draws for 2 steel MS362 chainsaws purchased from the Tractor Dome in Milford and S.J. McRae & Son in Bedeque. The key is attendees will receive 1 ballot per session they attend. Sponsors. We did not solicit sponsors this year due to the change in format and the COVID pandemic, but we would like to thank all past sponsors who have supported the conference series over the years. Their logos actually appeared on one of the slides prior to the start as you were waiting to get into this presentation. Such things as speaker bios and any other handouts and material will be available through the NS Woods website in the coming days and weeks if you're interested in looking. Now, in terms of this evening's agenda, we're thrilled to be able to kick off this special COVID version of the Woodland Conferences with our 2 first presenters who are deputy ministers that are leading the transition of the forest sector during this post-Northern Pulp and COVID-19 period of time. The format will include each presenter speaking, and then after both speak, we will have plenty of time for Q&As. The event today will run till 8 p.m. Okay, so our first special guest is Julie Towers, who is Deputy Minister of the Department of Lands and Forestry. Julie will be providing an update from the department and highlight recent developments, including the transition to ecological forestry. Our second special guest is Kelliann Dean, the Deputy Minister for the Nova Scotia Department of Intergovernmental Affairs and Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Immigration. Julie, Kelliann, welcome to both of you, and thanks for participating. Julie, I'll pass it over to you.
There we go. Had to unmute. How many times have people said that recently using virtual technology? Thank you, Don. So happy to be here to be at the first session of this. Certainly, I know we all like to be in the woods is our preference, but we do want to share information. So I'm quite pleased to be here to talk about the ecological forestry work that's happening in the province. And many of you would be well aware that Professor William Leahy provided a report. He and his expert panel put together a report in 2018 with 45 recommendations. the overarching part of it was about putting biodiversity and ecosystems first. So it was about the fact that, you know, traditionally in forestry, as you well know, it's been more about wood supply, but more and more over the years, we've learned a lot about protecting water, protecting species, etc. So of those 45 recommendations, which ranged over quite a few things, one of the overarching aspects that that team recommended was to use a triad approach. And the concept of the triad, which was developed in Maine with professors Bob Seymour and Matt Hunter, is really about a zoning approach. And so that's what they recommended for, with a focus on Crown land, and we'll talk about that. So we're doing that within the department, working with everyone out there who works on Crown land one way or another, to look at how that zoning or triad approach will work. So we have a quick video to help explain it. Some of you may have been able to see it. It's on our department website, but it's there to help people understand the concept. So we're going to play that for you. Let me just switch slides here, folks. So the forest practices reviewed. So the focus is conserving biodiversity, nurturing healthy forests, and that's all the functioning systems, and supporting a sustainable industry. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to turn it to Liz for a video. Probably going to have to back out and up. Here we go.
Ecosystems. These designated parts of the province include protected areas. No timber harvesting is permitted here. Nova Scotia's forests are a valuable natural resource. Forests cover about 75% of our province. Our forests provide habitat for thousands of species. Forests are enjoyed by both visitors and residents, and they employ thousands of Nova Scotians in our forestry sector. Can these two important and different values coexist? We believe they can. That's why we're adopting an ecological model to manage our forests. Our new model has three key parts that work together: conservation areas, areas that focus on ecological goals with some harvesting, and areas of high production forestry. We call this triad model approach ecological forestry. Conservation areas preserve our naturally occurring biodiversity and ecosystems.
Okay. So ecological forestry, overall goals, definitely for healthy, multi-age, multi-species forests. How do you conserve and restore ecosystem diversity? And at the same time have sustainable and diverse economic opportunities. So remember, it's really important when we're talking about biodiversity, it is the priority here, but biodiversity is the whole range of diversity, species, ecosystems, genes, and it's about the conservation of it, but also the sustainable use of it. So that those resources over time are being used, but it's not in a way that precludes ecological functions to happen, whether that's controlling floods, carbon sequestration, all those different aspects, forests and all the plants within them, including the trees, provide a lot of ecological goods and services. So you're trying to do a lot of things in forests and forestry. So as well as the sort of traditional forestry, we're also looking at what are the other opportunities, new products, new processes, how are they supported? And how are the ways that we balance all those different issues? So the intent for the department, certainly for ecological forestry, is to focus on Crown land. That was the recommendation that Professor Leahy and his team made. As private landowners, this was really important to start with Crown land, the public land, develop the policies, develop different tools. So it's not required on private land, but some of these aspects of ecological forestry practices and the tools can certainly be voluntarily adopted on private land should landowners prefer. We absolutely are encouraging landowner participation in consultations as well as we develop a lot of these pieces that go with it. So we're going to encourage you, and I'll walk through what are some of those opportunities right now. So we're running at this point in time 10 different projects related to ecological forestry. And these first 5 are ones that in particular I see that you'd likely have an interest in. You may have already participated in some aspects or would be looking forward to participating as we work on them. So the recommendation on silviculture review for both private and Crown lands. So that's gearing up right now. A lot of people, probably most people participating tonight, take advantage of the silviculture programs. Not only the ones that are funded through the department or through mills that are registered buyers, or you do it whatever you choose to do on your own lands. Because really it's the culture of trees. So that could be planting, thinning, or anything else. The small scale wood heat initiative is really about, and this fits with a low carbon approach, where we know we're using fossil fuels, particularly the oil-fired hot water heating systems, where we have public buildings, provincial government buildings is what we're starting with, obviously. And looking at wood chip or wood pellets, which many of you know already exist in some buildings in the province, but to really expand that. And so we're using locally sourced wood chips. This is very much a market for private landowners. And we have 9 buildings in 6 sites that are now in construction or just finished construction that are taking this approach. And we're working, assessing about 24 more provincial buildings for the next group of them. And hopefully this will just keep expanding, potentially to other federal or municipal buildings, private sector buildings that can use wood heat. It's a very effective use of a local resource that's also a low carbon. Another one is you may have heard about, and some of you would have used, for years we've had a forest management guide. It's like a set of decision keys to help you choose based on your soils and vegetation on your sites, what kind of silviculture harvest systems you may use. So there was a lot of identification that the decision keys tended to lean to heavily high proportion of trees harvested. So there's been updates going on to the guide and consultations on those to enhance the sites. So more often you get to more retention, keeping long-lived shade tolerant or intermediate shade tolerant species. So, you know, the red spruces, oaks, yellow birches, sugar maples, those type of trees. And particularly for how that will be used in the matrix zone that we talked about, which is the sort of mixed management with some harvesting, but also high focus on biodiversity and ecosystem function. So also some of you would have used the pre-treatment assessment process that we use for crown lands where it's mandatory, which is doing the soil pits and checking the vegetation to try to make sure you have a good match. We have also recently started testing out our nutrient budget model. So we have even more information on the soils and the conditions there. The other thing is, for years, we've had the State of Forest report, which traditionally was done kind of every 5 years, and then became certain things could be updated each year. And the most current stuff, data is always on our website. But what we've done is, because it can be very technical, which some people use as is, but also to help communicate with the public and people we know, we've gone out and asked people what would be useful, what would be the most useful types of information you could have. And so we're working on that, and updated, revised version will be used in the future. The other big one is species at risk. So the programs that we have now, the habitats we identify, how we, the special management practices we use on Crown to try to make sure there's sufficient habitat. So there's a lot of work going on that, and a lot of interest for private landowners, of course, if you do have any species at risk in your areas. So those are ones that, you know, you probably have higher level interest, but there's 5 more projects which you may be interested in. So the natural disturbance regimes, which is really, you know, what are those natural processes, hurricanes, fires, etc., that drive how long stands tend to hold. So we did do one paper. We had experts who put together what historical records show us. And they're doing some more work about, okay, well, how does that translate to practices on the ground? We're working on updating the old forest policy we've had since 2008. We're also looking at a regulatory process using the environmental assessment approach for how you do 20-year forest management plans. And by using the environmental assessment framework, it brings in a formal public consultation process. So more people are involved in that planning over that period of time. The high production forestry, which is a big piece of the zone. So a lot of the criteria, how do you decide which areas are going to be high production? The outcomes-based forestry, which is really a way where Crown licensees have set outcomes. It could be water quality, wildlife habitat, wood supply, and rather than the department be in there directing details, we set the overall outcomes with a licensee, and then we monitor and audit. So that's used in Maine, Quebec, New Brunswick. So we're looking at that system for Nova Scotia. So coming to the different ways that people can participate, and this was very much part of the recommendation coming out of the Leahy report was, you know, make sure that there's a good understanding of public and stakeholder interests. What are those diverse interests? How do you build that into decision making? Making sure there's a lot of transparency, information getting out as well. So we've been taking that approach as much as we can in this past year and a bit, in different formats, which you see there. And I'll touch on some of those. So in 2019, we started a detailed consultation with stakeholders on the forest management guide, the first revised draft, and the direction we were going. And then in 2020, there was a more like a technical document draft to look at. And now we have it out, and hopefully some of you have been making comments or will send us comments on the what's functionally a third draft, which helps get us to that multi-age, multi-species type of approach. We've also had species at risk forums where we've had a few hundred people come to talk about how species at risk are managed and to share general information, and we want to do that on an ongoing basis. We had a discussion paper on high production forestry, which was identifying the rough criteria. And now we'll be going out to say, this is what we heard from everyone. And okay, now to how do you actually choose the sites? We did have some of that. I mentioned a survey about what kind of information would be useful for state of forest report. And so we'll have an update on that for folks. We'll also have a draft old forest policy for people to look at. One really important one I want to draw your attention to that we're doing is around the private woodland owner survey, which is the department working and the forestry transition team. So we've had over 1,300 responses so far, which is great, completed surveys, but we'd like to get even more. So we really encourage, if you haven't completed one, please do so. I know some people had a big issue where they got partway through and got bumped off, whether that was their internet connection, we don't know, but we encourage people to do that. And if any of you are having issues, you can call a department office near you, and one of our staff will enter the information for you to get it done. Upcoming consultations as well, as I mentioned, the high production, state of forest, the old forest policy, the draft forest stewardship plans. What does a 20-year plan look like, and what are the kinds of things that need to be considered? The silviculture review, I'm sure many of you will be interested in that. So as we get that out there, really encourage people to provide us info, what you see or what works and what doesn't. We have a ministerial advisory committee that was formed specifically to give advice on implementing the recommendations from the report. And there's 14 members. We're the real cross section from environmental advocacy, forestry licensees, tourism, that we've had several meetings now looking at these different projects and directions coming out of that. They bring quite a range of perspectives, and it's good to have that mix. So we'll, if you know some of the people on that committee or you're interested in who's on that committee, that information's all on our website, and you may want to chat with them. So now we'd like to ask you a question. So I'm going to pause here. This ends my part, and then turn it back over to the moderators.
Okay, so everybody has the opportunity now to answer the question, to the poll question. On your woodlands, should you use zoning? Which zone of the triad are you most likely to use on your woodland? So use that as an example. Which best fits your objectives and goals on your woodland? We're going to leave about approximately 2 minutes for everybody to do this. Again, you go up to the right-hand corner of your screen below the Q&A. You should see polling there. It will give you the opportunity to click on your choice. And Kelliann, whenever you're ready to get started, feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conference as well. Julie, it's hard to follow up on you, but I really appreciate the time tonight. So I'll try to navigate my slides as well. And happy to give you a little bit of background on what we've been doing on the transition team, which builds on what Julie has already described in terms of the efforts of the department. So control function. Oh, okay. Function page down. Here we go. No, I'm not doing it right. Okay.
You got to click on the presentation. And then do it.
Okay. Ha ha! Technology, don't we love it? Okay, well, I've already told you who I am, so there we go. So as many of you would probably be aware, the transition team was set up, about a year ago, actually now, following the closure of Northern Pulp. And our mandate was really to look at what could be done in the wake of this closure to provide support for people immediately, and also to take a look at what kind of long-term support would need to be put in place to help the sector transition. So our group is Julie and I, as well as the Assistant Deputy Minister for Labor and Advanced Education, as well as the DM for Energy. And from the private sector, we have Doug Ledwidge from Ledwidge Lumber. We've got Jeff Bishop from Forest Nova Scotia, Don Bureau from the Nova Scotia Community College, Greg Watson from North Nova Forest Co-op, and Debbie Reeves, who represents the large private landowners association. And I have to thank our members profusely for the time and the commitment that they have made to this team, and for their advice and their guidance. They have been valuable members. It's been a difficult task that we've been given, and everybody has really risen to the challenge. It certainly hasn't been easy, and we haven't always agreed. And I know that there are many in the sector that might not necessarily agree with everything that we've done, or some of the things that we're proposing to do. But at the end of the day, we do have a common goal, and that really is about implementing ecological forestry and how to do it in a way that continues to support people and bring them along. So we started with 3 key areas of focus, and that was to advise on the short-term items that could help people right away, as well as we had $50 million in a transition fund to utilize. And what happened was we weren't actually able to utilize all of that in the first couple of months. And so that was put into a trust, which is now functional, and projects are being accepted that will continue to have an impact on transition. And what we find ourselves looking at more now, 1 year later, is what some of those longer term approaches and innovative approaches could be to help the sector develop, while also ensuring ecological sustainability and helping to ensure that the sector can be globally competitive. We had an initial 6-month mandate, which has now been extended to June. You know, it doesn't happen overnight, as many of you would know, and we're going to continue to stay focused on putting the building blocks in place that will help the transition continue. And, you know, I'm really proud of the fact that we've been able to maintain momentum through the pandemic. The forestry sector was one of the sectors that was able to continue to work, implemented some safety practices that respected public sector or public safety and public health guidelines, but wasn't closed down to the extent that some of the other sectors of the economy were. And so despite the fact that it has been difficult in the wake of the closure of Northern Pulp, the sector has continued to work, and lumber prices due to COVID have almost doubled, actually, from where they were this time last year, due to people renovating and a high demand for lumber in the US. So, you know, we know it's volatile and cyclical, but right now there is a bit of a cushion that's helping as we continue to transition. So the Leahy report is absolutely foundational to everything we've done. And I learned a few things, Julie, from your presentation, so thank you. You know, ecological forestry is something we say, and you know, it's not always clear what we mean by that. And I think that the department has provided that clarity. And the vision that we worked on as a transition team, which is right there, it's about creating a strong, sustainable, inclusive, and diversified and innovative forestry sector, respected for its stewardship practices and successfully delivering high value for lower ecological impact. So this is very much aligned with the premise of the Leahy report and where the government is accepted to go in the future. What we landed on in terms of trying to implement this new vision were 4 key priority areas that we felt would provide the building blocks for the sector to continue to grow and transition. So we need more innovation, diversification, and entrepreneurship. We need woodlot owner leadership, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So more engagement with woodlot owners. Workforce development to make sure that people will have the skills that are required to do the kinds of work that will be required as we move into ecological forestry. And also we recognize that the supply chain that we have is very interconnected, and we have to ensure that there is viability maintained in that supply chain. So these are the principles that the transition team have developed, that we've communicated to the sector, and that we're continuing to work on. So I'll just give you a little bit of information around the kinds of initiatives that we mean when we're talking about these pillars. So under innovation, diversification, entrepreneurship, the Forestry Innovation Transition Trust, as I mentioned earlier, is now in place, and it is very much looking for industry or sector-led proposals that are innovative, that are looking to the future, that are, again, setting the stage for diversification and will take us in a new direction. They've released several projects that they've announced. One is a voucher program with an NSCC. I think they've also, Julie, made an investment in the Innovation Hub. So again, that's going to help to fuel innovation and projects and ideas that people have. The project with NSCC is quite interesting because it makes use of assets that NSCC has that are forestry related, and businesses, startups, people with business ideas can use those assets to further their ideas. So it really is a way to continue to spur some innovation and growth in the sector. We've also been working on I guess I would call it a provincial research agenda in collaboration with the Transition Trust. And so there's, many different areas of research that can help us, for example, look for new materials, new wood products, the bioeconomy. And what we're going to try to do is to outline the types of research initiatives broadly that the province is interested in with respect to forestry, and then collaborate with public sector, with the educational institutions, private sector, government, and see if we can land on some core areas and then invite research into those areas. So that has the potential as well to be funded by the Transition Trust. So that work is ongoing. The Nova Scotia Business Inc. Launched about a year ago, or just shy of a year ago, a forestry innovation rebate program. So that's a rebate program for upgrades or equipments. This is more export related, and I think they've announced one project already for a pellet mill, and I think that was Shaw Pellet Mill, and another one I think is in the works, GNTI. Jillian and I are side helping each other out here. As well, we had virtual trade missions that were conducted in the summer. What we felt was that there was an opportunity to learn from other jurisdictions who had gone through transition, or who we felt maybe had best practices that they could share for us as we were looking at what we wanted to do in Nova Scotia. And so we went virtually to Sweden, Finland, and Maine, and we're able to glean a lot of information around things that were deemed important around woodlot owner leadership, the organization of support for woodlot owners, innovation, government policy, and other areas that might differentiate some of those European countries because of their best practices. So we are learning and going over all of the information that we gleaned from those missions to see what might make sense for Nova Scotia, what things we may want to build on here. We're still conducting market intelligence research to try to understand where there may be some markets for wood chips. There's still a challenge with what to do with the significant amount of wood chips that we have. There's currently some burning of biomass that's happening at the Brooklyn Mill as well as in Port Hawkesbury. That is an interim solution. So we still have to turn our minds to what the future will look like. And so we're looking into options for that. As Julie mentioned, the Wood Heat Initiative is underway, and we hope to be able to do more because that is a great source, a great opportunity for us to use domestically produced chips here. The Innovation Hub, Julie could talk about that for hours, I know, but that is another key player in terms of looking at what we can do for efficiency, productivity. They're doing some work, I believe, on roads, but also in the bioeconomy. So there's some interesting research projects that they are spearheading as well. And, you know, other things like mass timber, products that we currently don't produce here that we could produce here is an area of interest that's going to help us diversify. So, you know, the other side of this is workforce development. In order to move forward, we've got to figure out what are the jobs going to look like, what will the requirements be, and how might people need to upgrade their skills. The other opportunity that we saw early on is some people wanted retraining through Nova Scotia Works in the wake of the Northern Pulp closure. So immediate support was put in place there. We developed a new forestry apprenticeship initiative in cooperation with Labor and Advanced Education. And a new initiative that I think is really going to help the sector move forward is the Forestry HR Sector Council. Many different industry sectors have their own HR council or sector council, and they develop a strategic plan for human resources to figure out where there are gaps, where they may need to train people. And in some instances, we just don't have people and we may need to look elsewhere to bring people in with certain kinds of skill sets. So that planning is going to be starting through the Sector Council. And I believe that work is being led with by Forestry Nova Scotia, and they have hired an individual to take that on. And they'll be working collaboratively with Labor and Advanced Education. As well, there has been some work done on workforce analysis. So, you know, who do we have in the sector and what kind of skills do they have? And asset mapping, which looked at from an Atlantic Canadian perspective, what kind of training is out there, formal education, different kinds of post-secondary training, certifications, anything that is forestry related, and all of those assets through Atlantic Canada. And the intent is to make that public when it's finished so that people can see what's out there already. And the other important part of that work is that will help us identify gaps in areas that we may want to fill ourselves in Nova Scotia. And that work is ongoing with Labor and Advanced Education and the Nova Scotia Community College. The other area I think that has come up through the work on workforce planning and development is more professionalization for the sector. I think that was also raised in the Leahy report. So, you know, that will be part of going forward and looking at what might need to happen there and where within the sector that could occur. The other piece of our work focuses on woodlot owner leadership. And, you know, what we did see in some of the other jurisdictions from our travels, our virtual mission, if you will, was, you know, there was a really, I think I would say, sophisticated level of support that was provided to woodland owners to help them make informed decisions about how to manage their lands, as well as a lot of data analytics and technology that was used to try to provide the kind of information for decision making for woodlot owners. The other thing we learned too is, you know, the economic motivation was not obviously the only motivation, and many of you would know this. There are intrinsic values, recreational values, generational, passing on land to, you know, the next generation, other values that woodland landowners held. And so trying to understand what those are and what information people need to fulfill, you know, their desires with their land was really, really important. And so that's one of the premises for the Woodland Owner Survey that Julie mentioned. We really want to get an understanding of the breadth of objectives that woodlot owners have, what kinds of information they're looking for, where they're currently getting their information and where they might like to get it from, and what it is that they are intending to do in the future. So we really like to get a good baseline. So again, as Julie said, the more people we have that will fill this out, the better, because what we want to do is dig into that, have further focus groups with individuals, and try to determine a way forward that provides the resources that woodlot owners will need in the future, should they want to adapt to the ecological forestry model, but also, you know, if they want to be doing forest management planning and they want to take a different approach and they want to have an informed approach. So we've talked a lot about this at the transition team, and I know that this will be an area of focus that will be continued in the weeks to come. And I guess, you know, the other piece I'll just touch on is on the supply chain side. So early days, we focused heavily on putting money into programs so that we could keep people working. So the silviculture and road work. There was a contractor financing program that was put in place for the short term. But I guess I'll jump to the Timber Loan Board. We also worked with our colleagues in agriculture and fisheries to see if there was a possibility to create a dedicated lending facility for the forestry sector, similar to the agriculture and fisheries loan board. And we were able to do that with the cooperation of our colleagues there. So now we have the Timber Loan Board. So that is a lending vehicle that will have favorable rates for the sector and will understand how to deal with resource-based businesses. So I think that that should be able to also help contractors as well. There was a modification of the renewable energy standard, and that enabled the burning of more biomass at the Brooklyn plant. So that obviously provides some relief for wood chips in that part of the province. That was put in place as Muskrat Falls energy was slower to come online. So that, you know, won't be happening forever, but it's certainly an opportunity now to use surplus wood chips that we would have that we aren't able to find another use for at this stage. And the other piece that we were able to do this year through the department was to modify the land purchase program and only use it for forestry applicants. So again, another measure to support the sector. So, you know, I think, you know, what you see here is a mix between new initiatives as well as a modification of initiatives that the department was already doing or that was able to shift in the wake of Northern Pulp's closure. And we were able to try to put the support where it was needed most, when it was needed most. But, you know, as we move forward, it really is about supporting the implementation of the Leahy report and ensuring that we continue to innovate, we continue to find new opportunities and encourage the development of new opportunities so that we can have some diversification in the sector moving forward. So with that, I have a WebEx polling question too. So I will turn it, I guess, over to folks. And we're really interested in knowing from you, when you consider the significant change that's going to be happening in the forestry sector in the near and long term, what level of change readiness you believe Nova Scotia's woodland owners have? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kelliann. Well done and very informative. Tough time to be involved in these projects, and but we're in good hands. So we appreciate your presentations, Julie and Kelliann, today. The poll question: if we think about the significant change that will be happening within the forestry sector in the near and longer term, what level of change readiness do you believe Nova Scotia's woodland owners have? A, most are ready for change. B, some are ready for change while some others are not ready. C, most are not ready for change and will need help. And D, don't know, not sure. So we'll give you some time to do that while we shift to the next stage. For those of you that were wondering, we have approximately 180 people that registered for this session. We had 102 that were involved in the last poll, so good numbers that are involved here. Again, we'll try to answer all the questions given tonight, but if time becomes limiting, we may have to prioritize the questions based on those that are connected to today's presentations. And please note that it is our intention to provide answers to all questions answered today. If we don't get them to you in this session, we will get the answers back to you personally directly by email. So we will get back to you. First question, we received a question. This is for Julie. Julie, on page 8 of your presentation, could you please repeat the discussion about number 10? So that's on page 8 of your presentation. If you could please repeat number 10. And you're still muted there.
There we go. Thank you. I was waiting for that to unmute. Okay, Don, I want to make sure I'm on the right one. You said slide 8, but number 10, maybe it was the 10th project?
Page 8 and number 10. So does that make sense? 10th project? Repeat number 10 on page 8 was the question.
I suspect that's what it was. And whoever's asking the question could update. So the outcomes-based forestry, if that's the 10th project they were wondering about,
Right.
it could, yeah, it could be like, because the title slide probably doesn't have a number on it. So that the idea of that is that instead of the department saying, you've got to do exactly this way, we're going to be there telling you exactly what silviculture treatment to use or how to measure X or Y. Instead, you set the broad parameters for what the outcomes for a Crown licensee should be. So if you're managing a Crown license, like Port Hawkesbury Paper or Westford or the Medway Community Forest Cooperative, you say, okay, here's the various outcomes we want you to hit. We want so much wood coming off. We want to make sure so much wildlife habitat is there, so much water quality, certain public consultation standards. And then the Crown licensee is responsible to meet those outcomes. And what also happens is the outcomes are developed in public consultation with, it would be a department and the licensee and stakeholders in the public. And then basically the department comes along and audits and says, well, did you reach those outcomes or not? And within the outcomes, there's also, it sounds really long-winded, but, and as we go into consultation, those will become clearer. You identify the values, like wildlife habitat. You set your objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? What are your indicators? And what are your targets? So for example, you may say, I want X amount of old forest. That might be one of your targets you're aiming for, but it's part of an overall objective to make sure you have a mix of ages or a mix of species. Okay, so hopefully that helps.
Great. Thanks for that, Julie. Next question, and I know this is a popular one. With respect to transition initiatives, innovation and diversification, are there other uses of woodlands, such as for carbon sinks? And is there a market for carbon credits? What's the status of that?
Okay, so I can probably help with that. So it's definitely something that's being looked at. There's no system in Nova Scotia right now for that, for a carbon offset program. The ones that have been done are basically, it's somewhere like California, for example, that have a system that enabled them to pay money for those carbon offsets. Nova Scotia is under the cap and trade system, which is where the larger industries, Nova Scotia Power, for example, anyone with large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions pay into that. And it's created, you know, and some of that money is now available to go out, and you may have seen recent news releases on that. So there's no system yet, but Nova Scotia Environment, who leads on some of that work, has been doing some research into that, what some of the opportunities are, and there will be more discussion on that coming. But there's nothing available at this point in time, but it's very much, we're mindful of that, and we're working across energy, environment, our department, for example, to look at how we measure, how we do the carbon accounting, for example. And so there's going to be more and more on that, and we'll have lots of updates coming forward in coming weeks and months for folks.
Great, thank you. To everybody, you're reminded, just send your questions to all panelists and they will get to us. Okay, next question. When can we expect RFPs to be issued for additional oil to wood conversions? The process seems to be really slow, exclamation point.
Okay. So, and I know the first, I noticed that myself. It was fairly complex procurement. It did take a while. The big difference is it wasn't like we were procuring to buy something and then get it, whether it was good or services. These were 20-year energy contracts that we were entering into. So we had to make sure we were doing it well. That's the reason we did the pilot project for 6 sites. Because we've now worked out what those look like and what the contracts need to look like, we have a much better idea going into this next phase. So it's really now we're waiting for the government to say, yes, please continue. We've got a lot of the technical assessments done on potential sites. So we need those departments, because remember, it's a mix. It could be health or transportation or whomever responsible for the buildings. And then say, yes, this is a good building and this is why, it meets the different criteria, how much oil it burns, how old the system is, those kinds of things. So once we get the go ahead, as everybody knows, we have a premier designate and a brand new cabinet coming in the next couple of weeks. And until they're in place, we'll be looking for that policy direction to know that we can proceed.
And we have a new premier that's very familiar with the issues at hand.
Yep. Yeah, and very supportive. Yeah, it was in his platform.
We have a question that would be of interest to Christmas tree growers here. I guess they're suggesting that the tax on Christmas tree land should be 0 rated as it now is under agriculture. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know, Kelliann, if you want to speak to that from your experience at municipal affairs, but I couldn't speak to land taxes. I mean, I know about the forest resource. You know,
issue though that we should revisit and see, you know, there's.
Can you hear that, Don?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I am aware of that one. It came up during my days at municipal affairs. So it is something that I think we need to explore. And it would be, it's a land tax issue, obviously, that we'll have to have further conversations with municipalities about, but you know, we can take that offline and see if we can determine if there's some more work that we could do on that one.
Okay, Kelliann, here's another one for you, if you don't mind. Can you elaborate on the land purchase program for forestry applicants?
That's yours, Julie.
Oh, sorry.
You can probably explain it.
Well, you can go. I'll give you the honors.
Okay. Can you hear me, Don?
Yes.
We're maintaining our physical distance here in my office.
Oh, I see. Right.
So that each year for a number of years, the department has had $1.5 million to buy land. As everyone knows, we have limited crown land. So we're always looking for opportunities for good sites. Sometimes it's to fill in holdings where we own all the land around something, or it's a special coastal property or whatever. So this year, one of the things with the upheaval in the forest sector that we suggested, and the transition team supported, and the department and the government supported, was to use that to buy land as we normally would. It didn't have to be forestry land, but it was designed so that forestry businesses, people that work in the forest sector, it was an opportunity for them, because many own a lot of land, for some cash flow. So the benefit to the province is this comes into the Crown Land Holdings and available for a whole range of uses. And so we've been working on that. We had a lot of applicants and some very good properties. And when we get those signed off, people will know where they are. And the other thing is, going forward, even though that was for this fiscal year, those properties are identified. So as we go into the next fiscal year, and presumably we still have capital money to buy more land, then they're in the list along with a lot of other properties. So it's an ongoing thing. The only thing we did differently this year was to make sure it was a forestry business of some form. Okay.
Okay. Next question we often hear about at the conferences is related to markets for private woodlot owners and their products. The question is, in the presentations, I did not hear one word about the poor pricing woodlot owners are receiving for their wood products while the price of lumber is at an all-time high.
So that, and certainly I've heard that for many years. And, you know, as a woodland owner, my husband and I have seen that where we've sold wood. But you have to remember the government does not set market prices. So this is very much between the sellers and the buyers to have that negotiation. So if people have specific questions related to what departments and governments do, be more than happy to take those questions and try to support that. But this is exactly why for 10 years I've been so keen on the innovation side and the bioeconomy side, because we've seen that in other sectors. We're always going to have important base work like lumber, for example, construction. But what we want to do is make sure we also have some products that are, instead of the high volume, lower value like pulpwood, that we're getting some products that are low volume but very high value. And that's a lot of what we're working on. And that is what will translate for woodland owners as they provide supply as well.
Thank you. We have a question about the assessment framework. Are you primarily looking at this from a public consultation process, or are you anticipating that there could be requirements for assessments of various valued ecosystem components, such as on-the-ground surveys for species at risk?
I suspect that's the one which is up on the screen I'm looking at around the environmental assessment framework, potentially?
I expect so, yes.
Okay, so that and environmental assessments for forestry are used in some other provinces. So anyone who's curious can certainly go on the web and look at those. Newfoundland, it would be an example, Newfoundland, Labrador. It's used out west. Manitoba or Saskatchewan or both, I forget now. And so it's a broad framework. As you know, for environmental assessment, it looks at social values, economic and environmental. So it'd be a mix of those. To that question about species at risk, they're very much built into environmental assessments now and would be as well in a forestry. So those are those valued ecosystem components is what it is called under environmental assessment. And so species at risk, or it could be wetlands, it could be anything that's a special note, would be identified, because that's the whole idea, is you want to map out what's there, what there is to work with, and how you're going to function, how you're going to operate. So one of the things we really want to work on species at risk is making it easier for people to find out if they have them on their land, because if they have an interest of working with those species at risk, like making sure that they're not cutting down a tree that has a rare lichen, for example, you know, whatever it might be, we want to figure out how to make that information readily available to folks, not only for a Crown licensee at a large scale, but also for individual woodland owners. But we have to be careful about the way we do it, because sometimes people want to know where species at risk are, so they can go look at it, but that very disturbance can be an issue.
Good point. Okay, I guess this is the last question of the night. The time has flown by. Is high production forestry a new term to continue with clear cutting?
Well, it's certainly similar. It's somewhat synonymous, but it's not just that. The idea behind the high production forestry within the triad is, if you're doing a much more careful matrix approach where biodiversity and ecosystems is a priority, you're going to have a lot more partial harvesting, which means your wood supply is going to shift. So the idea, and this is what the Leahy report identified, is if you want timber supply to flow, you could have a smaller area of land producing more wood, which is more the agricultural crop kind of approach associated with high production forestry. So that's how you harvest, if you fertilize, if you thin it like 1, 2, 3 times, anything to increase yield. That's a smaller area of land producing more wood, while the matrix becomes a much larger area of land producing less wood. So it's the balance or offset between those categories. So hopefully that helps explain a bit.
Thanks, Julie. It always comes down to that balancing, the challenge. Well, on behalf of the 100+ people out here watching this these presentations tonight, I'd like to thank very much Julie and Kelliann for their time and effort put into this, and appreciate very much their presentations and information they provided. I hope it was a worthwhile evening for you ladies too, and I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunity for other feedback that you'll be able to get from some of the people that were involved in this presentation today. So thank you very much for that. To end the evening, I'd like to again thank our special guests, Julie and Kelliann, for kicking off our mini-series and providing interesting presentations on topics of interest to many Nova Scotians with an interest in our forests and forest sector. I'd like to remind everyone that this is the first in a series of at least 6 Wednesday evening mini-series presentations that will be running every 2 weeks from now. The next session will be February 24th, and it will be covering private land stewardship. A 6th session has recently been added on business innovation in the forest sector, and that will be April 21st. And there may be more added later as well. I'd also like to mention to you that there's a group of forest professionals that are also having noon hour webinars that are available for the public and woodland owners. And the schedule is on NS Woods as well. The next episode is going to be entitled Climate Change, Adaptive Forestry. That's February 25th from 12 to 1 p.m. Now, for what you've been waiting for. Our Woodland Conferences are well known over the years for our grand door prizes that we give away each year. And it is a chainsaw. Well, this COVID year is no different. In fact, we'll be holding 2 draws for chainsaws at the end of the conference mini-series. So that means that 2 of you people will be walking away with a chainsaw. So we will be holding these draws, and all of you can participate in them. In fact, every one of these mini-series events you participate in, there will be a ballot with your name that will go into the barrel for those 2 lucky draws. So, in other words, the more events you take part in, the higher chance you have of winning a new Steel pro-grade chainsaw. The only catch, and yes, there's always a catch, we need you to complete an exit survey when you get out of the WebEx here this evening and every time that you register, because we need to get information from you to plan future sessions. So you will put your information on that exit survey, and that is what we'll be using for the draw. So please do so on your way out. Your information will be kept private and not used for any promotional or commercial purposes. So that's it for now, everyone. We hope this was a worthwhile use of your time.